Welcome to our briefing on purchasing safety toe shoes using an employer allowance. Last year, the state worked with the STAG State Procurement Office to procure a price list for safety toe shoes. So the employees that are required to wear safety toe shoes were provided vendors that had shoes that they're supposed to go to purchase their shoes. So this was the safety toe shoe price list 18-12. And this price list, this contract price list, expired on Wednesday, August 14, 2019. Prior to the expiration of the safety toe shoe contract price list, the Department of Human Resources Development had been working with the unions to provide new instructions and guidelines on purchasing safety toe shoes using an allowance. So these instructions and guidelines are effective August 15, 2019. Today we will be going over these new purchasing guidelines and instructions. These new guidelines and instructions apply to the state executive branch employees only. They do not apply to Department of Education employees, charter school employees, judiciary, University of Hawaii, and employees of the Hawaii Health Systems Corporation. Everyone should have the following handouts. Today's meeting agenda, the safety shoe allowance purchasing guidelines and instructions, the allowance levels for safety toe shoes. So this handout has that on top in red, subject to ratification by unions. So once we get word from our labor relations people that the allowance levels have been ratified and it's okay, we will put together an attachment D as in dog to provide to everyone along with the instructions and the other attachments. Okay, so right now this is just temporary, subject to, that's why it says subject to ratification. Also, the final piece of handout that you should have would be the sample vendor list. So this is not a comprehensive list. This is a list of vendors that was made known to our office by programs that have utilized safety toe shoe vendors in the past. So in the future, you might have new vendors or even be made aware of other vendors the employees can use. So that's okay for them to use as long as they the shoes that they sell meet the OSHA requirements as well as the hazard requirements for the job. Okay. So effective August 15, 2019, the safety toe shoe allowance will allow employees to purchase shoes from any safety toe shoe vendor. So this includes online vendors. Yeah. With the safety toe shoe allowance purchasing program, there's responsibilities of various departments involved in purchasing for state government. And so let's go over the responsibilities of the participants. I ask that if you could please hold your question till the end, and then we'll have a question and answer session. Okay, so if everybody could refer to your handout, the guidelines and instructions handout, and we'll go over the responsibilities. So on the first page of your handout, near the bottom under the heading responsibilities, the first department is the Department of Accounting and General Services. So the DAGS, also known as DAGS, DAGS oversees the application of the program with respect to purchasing rules. And so because of this allowance, the rule that would be applicable would be the small purchase rules. So within a year, your program purchase of safety toe shoes cannot exceed $15,000. If the program anticipates that the total number of shoes being purchased with the value is more than $15,000 for the year, they would have to do a solicitation or invitation for bid. Also, the DAGS pre-audit office would be responsible for reviewing all the submissions from your fiscal office on payments and purchases of safety toe shoes. So if they find out that there's missing documentation or some documentation is not appropriate, they will disallow it. Next, we have departments and agencies of the executive branch. So as I said earlier, this program instructions and guidelines apply only to employees required to wear safety toe shoes that work in the executive branch agencies. Yeah. So the departments are responsible for providing the employees with the hazard assessment, instructions on how purchasing should be done, as well as training on the requirements for the safety toe shoe program. Okay, so if you turn to page 2, the next page, within the departments, the managers, the responsibilities of the managers are to make sure that if there is a requirement for that job position to wear safety toe shoes, there should be a hazard assessment form completed. Also, when an employee needs to purchase shoes, along with providing the employee the hazard assessment form, the supervisor or manager needs to have the purchase authorization form completed. So this is attachment B. Okay. Next, we have for the employees, the responsibility of the employee is to wear the proper foot protection when the employer determines that it's required. The employee is provided both the attachment A hazard assessment form as well as the purchase authorization form, the completed one, before the employee is allowed to shop for shoes. Okay, so the employee shops for the safety toe shoes on their own time. Once the employee selects the the shoes that they want, and the vendor has their shoes or needs to order it, the employee is supposed to tell their supervisor, and the supervisor prepares the purchase order and whatever documentation is required for the use of the P card, if they have a P card. And when the vendor has a shoe available for the employee, then the employee is allowed 1 hour to go pick up their safety toe shoes. Okay. When the employee picks up the safety toe shoes, the vendor signs off on the purchase authorization form, part 4, that certifies that the shoe meets the hazard assessment and OSHA standards for um, the required shoe. The Department of Human Resources officer, okay, so the department's human resources officer or designee play a important role also in the safety toe shoe program for employees that have a medically certified condition, foot condition. Yeah. So when an employee has a medically certified foot condition, the human resources officer or designee is responsible to review the physician certification form that the employee has his or her physician complete. So this is attachment C. And then the employer needs to determine what they need to do to accommodate that employee's condition. So we'll go over that more in detail in a little while. The Department of Human Resources Development Safety Office, so DHERD Safety Office, that's our office. We coordinate the safety toe shoe program with the agencies, the state agencies, as well as vendors, and we assist them with responding to any questions or concerns regarding the shoe purchases. Okay. The vendor is responsible for making sure that the shoes meet the manufacturer standards, the ASTM standards or ANSI standards, and assist the employees with the proper selection and fitting of the shoes. Okay. So, with that being said, let's start with the first step. Okay. So the first step is completing a hazard assessment if there is none for that job position. Okay. So as with any type of personal protective equipment, a hazard assessment needs to be completed to identify what are the features and protective equipment required for the employee to perform their duty safely. Okay. So for the safety toe shoe program, we developed a hazard assessment form specific to protective footwear. Okay. So this is what the attachment A hazard certification for foot protection looks like. Okay, so it's very similar to what was used when we had the price list. Okay, we just tweaked it a little bit so that to make it less confusing. The part that changed was the section where it says type of foot protection required for tasks shown above. There's 3 different levels. So as the base, we have the first item, the first box, impact and compression. Okay, so this is the basic safety toe shoe. Okay, the next box we have is safety toe shoes with that added protection of electrical hazard protection. Yeah, and then the third box we have is for employees that require safety toe shoes that have that puncture resistant sole. Okay, and so also with that, so these 3 boxes correspond with the different allowance levels. So we'll go into that more in detail in a little while. On the right hand side, you will see the additional required features. So based on the assessment and the duties that the employee performs, there may be slip resistant requirements. The shoe may be water resistant or waterproof. Some people working with caustic chemicals may require chemical resistant the top of their shoes. And then for people that do welding, they might require metatarsal protection. Under the base, there's the height of the shoe. So there's low cut, high cut, and then other could be if employees need to have mid cut because they might be working on uneven ground. And so these are, when you check off one of these boxes, this is the minimum requirement of the shoe. Okay, so let me give you some examples of how this hazard certification works. Okay, so let's say you have a janitor that works in an office building. So their duties are to do sweeping, mopping, emptying rubbish. They will be required to push maybe a cart, and they would be required to do occasionally waxing, buffing of the floors, which utilizes a heavy machine that's over 75 pounds. So some of the hazards identified could be the toes being crushed if the cart or the buffer or equipment were to roll over their toes. They might slip if they're working in the restroom trying to mop down wet surfaces. Okay, and so the shoe features required would be the impact compression. Because they work on regular flooring, pretty level, they might only need low-cut shoes, and then it would be slip-resistant shoes that they would need, as well as water-resistant shoes because they're not standing in wet areas that's like 3 or 4 inches deep with water. Okay, so those would be the features that the custodial workers would need. Now, I had a supervisor ask me, oh, my kitchen workers, usually we provide safety toe shoes, slip resistant, water resistant, and when they have to hose down the kitchen, we provide rubber boots for them to wear over their safety toe shoes. Okay, so are the rubber boots part of the safety toe shoe allowance program? Okay. The answer is no. The rubber boots is like you would purchase it like any other type of personal protective equipment, like your gloves or your chaps that people may need, or hard hats. Okay, so you would go through that procurement process and get like 3 quotes and purchase those. And my understanding is the rubber boots are about $28 or so for each one, so you would purchase that separately. Okay. We've had supervisors that ask, oh, I have a group of employees that are considered multi-skilled workers, and so they would be out on the road doing clearing of brush. Wait, I'm sorry, excuse me one moment. Okay, thank you. Sorry for the interruption. We had some disturbance outside. Okay, so for those people, they might be having to clear debris that is has nails protruding out of them, or sometimes they would be required to work in areas that have vegetation, like your kiawe trees or something that have sharp thorns. So for those people, besides the safety toe feature, they would be required to have the sole puncture resistant feature on their shoes too, so that when they step on anything, they wouldn't get injured from the bottom of their feet wouldn't get injured. Yeah. And so for those people, they might be required to wear a minimum of 6-inch cut shoes to protect their ankles and feet from that vegetation and debris. Um, and maybe they would need slip resistant, also lug soles if for better traction. Yeah. Um, and so if they occasionally have to do welding, like our bridge maintenance workers, occasionally they might have to do welding, so they might need to consider the metatarsal protection, or they would check off other, which would mean they, instead of having lace shoes, the other requirement might be to wear pull-on boots so that the sparks from the welding do not go through the laces and burn their feet. Yeah, so those are some of the considerations um, in the hazard assessment form. Okay, so once that's done, and you have identified the types of foot protection, then you would need to look and see what are the allowance levels. So if everyone could please pull out their handout that says safety toe shoes allowance levels, and then on top of it would say subject to ratification by unions. Okay, so the first level we have is at $131. Yeah. So some of the features for the level 1 shoes, um, with the base of being impact compression, could be, water resistant, waterproof, slip resistant. So it's not all of that shoe is not does not have all of these features. It's just some of these features the employee might need. You actually won't find a shoe that has all of these features listed. So it should be or. But basically, the basic thing is it's a safety toe shoe that provides impact compression protection. Okay. The next level would be at the $164 level, would be a safety toe shoe that has that electrical hazard protection. So if you have anybody that does like electrical or like your electrician type of duties, then this would be the level of allowance level that we would give the employee shopping for shoes. So it could be water resistant, electrical hazard protection shoe, might have lug soles if they're working on boxes that might be on an incline or mounted somehow so that they need better traction. And the next level would be the level 3 at $200. So basically, the basic feature on that would be the safety toe shoe with puncture resistant soles. And so it could have maybe the heat resistant, maybe it would include electrical hazard protection, but the basic feature we're looking at would be the puncture resistant sole. So all of these levels doesn't take into consideration what the height of the shoe needs to be. So it could be any height. It could be low cut, puncture resistant shoe, or mid cut or high cut, or even so at any levels. It doesn't matter what cut of shoes. It's just looking at the basic features. Yeah. And so, for instance, if a inspector, right, inspects the construction sites and they're exposed to debris that could puncture the sole of their feet, they could actually, they actually would need to purchase safety toe shoes with that puncture-resistant sole. And some people may only need to wear low cut. So that employee has up to $200 to spend for puncture-resistant shoe. Okay, so these allowance levels does it includes also the tax as well as the shipping and handling or any cost to return the shoe. So if the employee needs to order shoes because they work at a remote site and the vendor is not easily accessible, if they order online, the employee would need to make sure that the tax, shipping and handling, as well as return cost is all included in that total cost. Yeah. So let's say the employee orders a shoe online that costs $115, but when the employee checked with the vendor, the tax, shipping and handling, and return cost totals to be $30 more. So his shoe ends up to be $145. That means if the employee has allowance of $131, that employee would pay $14 out of pocket. Okay. So that's how that allowance would work. Okay. So once you identify what that allowance amount is, you would complete, the supervisor or manager would complete the purchase authorization form. And so this is what the purchase authorization form looks like, Part B. So Part 1 is the employee information, and then Part 2 is where you, the supervisor or manager, will indicate what the allowance level is, either 131, 164, or 200. And then in Part 2, this attachment B, we put in that blurb so that everybody knows the employer will be responsible for the amount up to the approved allowance. And the employee is responsible for any amount in excess of that approved allowance amount. Okay. So once that part is completed, then it's routed to whoever's responsible for approving the safety toe shoe purchase. Yeah. So once the approval is given and the signatures are all on there, then the supervisor or manager would make a copy, give a copy of this purchase authorization form with the attachment A hazard assessment form to the employee to go shopping on his own time. Okay, so once the employee identifies the shoe, then picks up the shoe at the store, then the employee would give that purchase authorization form for the vendor to sign off on. Okay. If the employee decides to purchase shoes online, then whoever assists the employee with the shoe purchase, whether it's a supervisor, manager, or the designated person, that person would be responsible for making sure that the shoe meets the hazard assessment as well as the OSHA standards. Yeah. And they would sign off on that form. Okay. Once the form is completed, the employee has purchased their shoes, then we ask the departments to assist us with providing a copy of the purchase authorization form attachment B with attachment A so that we can develop a database of shoes shoes that employees in state agencies wear. Right now we don't have anything, so if anybody was to ask us, oh, by any chance, do you know what kind of shoes or what are the major types of shoes that employees, state employees are wearing? We couldn't really say because we don't know. Yeah, so we're gonna use these to develop the database for it. Okay, so vendors are responsible to also make sure that the shoes being sold meet the are free from defects, yeah, from workmanship and material defects for 6 months. Okay, so we had a situation um, where the employee bought the shoes, and then after 2 weeks or so of wearing it, the shoes started to fall apart at the seams. So the employee told the supervisor. The supervisor got this receipt and went down to the vendor to show the vendor. Upon inspection, the vendor um, did agree that yes, it was a manufacturer defect, and so the vendor had the shoe repaired at no cost to the employee or the employer. Okay. Um, the reason why we're asking employees to have a hazard assessment form with them when they're shopping for shoes is so that the vendor can determine the proper types of shoes to show the employee, as well as make sure that the shoes fit the employee properly. We, on occasion, have employees that have odd size feet or, foot anomalies, yeah, or foot conditions that make it difficult for them to wear safety toe shoes, okay, or make it difficult for them to purchase safety toe shoes, okay. So in those instances, the employee would be told to have their medical physician complete the physician certification form so that the employer can identify what is the condition, the foot condition that the employee has that requires accommodation, and then also how or what is the suggested items necessary to accommodate the employee for that condition. So we had a situation in the past where the employee had a deformed big toe, and so the employee needed a really roomy toe cap for his safety toe shoe. So the employer had to pick up a shoe or identify a shoe for the employee that had a bigger toe cap. Yeah, and the employer paid 100% of the cost of the shoe within reasonable amount. So also we had a situation where an employee had an abnormal foot size where the left foot was size 15 and the right foot was size 17 and a half wide, extra wide. So the employer had to go work with the vendor to first identify what are the shoe styles that come up to size 15, as well as what needs to be done to have the vendor special order a shoe that's size 17 and a half extra wide, because that's not a normal shoe size. Also, what is a reasonable amount for the employer to pay for that accommodation? So in the case of the employee with two different foot sizes, the employer had to order two pairs of shoes, and how they looked at the addressing the what is reasonable is looking at the maximum allowance for the shoes, which is $200. So if they had to order 2 pairs, they would pay up to $400 for the 2 pairs of shoes to accommodate the employee. They wouldn't pay $700 to $800 for 2 pairs of shoes because the employee didn't need extra padding, extra cushion soles, and things like that. So the basic features and the shoes available would be up to the $200 per shoe. So if the employee says, "Oh, because of my foot condition, I cannot wear shoes," okay, if the requirement is for the employee to wear safety toe shoes in order to perform their work safely, then the employee cannot work without wearing shoes. Okay, shouldn't be at work. Okay, because we don't want them to be working unsafely without their shoes. Now, if the employee has a medical condition that's only temporary, then the employer would evaluate the situation and see what the employee needs to accommodate the employee so that they can work without injuring their feet. So that might mean maybe not getting them safety toe shoes, but providing them with overshoes that just clip on to their regular shoes so that they can work without having to wear safety toe shoes until their condition heals. So this is what the physician certification form looks like, attachment C. So the employer completes part 1 and 2, and then part 3 is where the physician completes identifying what is the employee's condition that needs to be accommodated. And the next line is where the doctor identifies what specific types of shoes are recommended, or features or items that are recommended. So ideally, it should come from a podiatrist that knows the kind of protective footwear, like overshoes, metatarsal guards, and things like that. Okay, so to summarize what we just went over, when the employer knows the employee needs shoes, if the employee is new, okay, so they can, with the shoe allowance, identify ahead of time, and get the paperwork done, attachment A and attachment B, so that an employee can go and pick up shoes, during their own time. If the employee needs replacement shoes, okay, and the supervisor or manager has determined that the employee's shoes are starting to wear out and will need a new pair of shoes or need the shoes replaced, then the same thing, the employee gets a copy of the attachment A and attachment B and shops for the shoes on their own time. Okay. Once the employee selects the shoe, the employee notifies the employer prepares the purchase order and orders a shoe if the shoes are the shoe size is not available from the vendor. And then if the shoe size is available from the vendor, then the employee will call their supervisor or manager and say, "Hey, you know what? I found my shoes. Is there any way for me to pick it up today? Does anyone have a P card that would be able to do that? Because it's approved, yeah, the allowance amount is approved, yeah." And so they can purchase the shoe right then and there. Employee doesn't have to make another trip. Or the other option is, because the employee has the approved authorization to purchase shoes, employee can pay for the shoes out of pocket first and request reimbursement with the receipt. because the purchase order already identify what the allowable amount is, yeah, to reimburse them. And for medical conditions, foot conditions, the employee has to have his physician complete the physician's certification form attachment C. That form goes to the employee's personnel office for evaluation and consultation with their EEO specialist or officer. And once that form is reviewed, the personnel office will approve and identify what specific um, items need to be done to address and accommodate the employee, and the employer pays for the entire amount of what is needed to provide the accommodation. So that's the safety toe shoe purchasing program using an allowance.